Welcome to our channel Folk Street Mystery, where every story begins in shadow and every clue goes under a single street lamp. Step inside. The next case is already waiting. Don't forget to share thoughts. Your feedback keeps the mystery alive. Now, let's begin.
Nero Wolfe investigates the chess tournament murder classic 1950s mystery. Chapter 1: The Reluctant Invitation. If there's one thing you should know about Nero Wolfe, it's this: he does not leave the brownstone unless civilization itself is in danger, and even then he would prefer civilization come to him. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, the kind of New York day that can't decide whether to thaw or freeze you solid. The city outside our West 35th Street brownstone looked like a chessboard after a losing game, gray, damp, and faintly resentful. Inside, however, the air was warm and rich with the perfume of Wolfe's orchids, drifting down from the plant rooms where he had just concluded his sacred 2 hours of communion. He sat in his enormous custom-built chair, a mountain of a man wrapped in yellow silk, eyes half closed, fingertips pressed together like a Buddha considering whether the universe deserved another chance. I was at my desk pretending to reconcile invoices. In reality, I was studying the mail and wondering which envelope might turn into a homicide. That's when the doorbell rang. Our visitor was Mr. Lionel Carstairs, tall, lean, wearing a camel hair coat and the expression of a man who had either lost money or expected to. He was president of Carstairs Industrial Metals and, more importantly, sponsor of the International Grandmaster chess tournament currently underway at the Hotel Churchill. He sat stiffly on the red leather chair opposite Wolfe, refusing the offer of beer with the brittle dignity of a man accustomed to command. "Mr. Wolfe," he began, "I require discretion." Wolfe's eyes opened a fraction. "You require it? Most people merely hope for it." Carstairs blinked. "Very well. I am prepared to pay for it." That got my attention. It also got Wolfe's, though you wouldn't have known from looking at him. "I detest chess," Wolfe said calmly. "It is an imperfect art masquerading as logic. Humans are involved. That ruins it." Carstairs stiffened. "This tournament represents months of planning. The finest players in the world are here: Petrov from Moscow, Reinhardt from Vienna, young Daniel Kessler from Chicago. Names," Wolfe interrupted, "are ornamental." I leaned forward. "Maybe he's got something less ornamental, Mr. Wolfe." Carstairs reached inside his coat and placed an envelope on the table between them. "Cream paper. No return address. I have received 3 of these in the past week." I picked it up. The message inside was typed in neat capitals. "Checkmate comes before midnight." "Cute," I said. "Any explanation?" "None. Until yesterday." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "Proceed." The defending champion, Viktor Petrov, received a similar message. More explicit. He removed a second sheet from his breast pocket and handed it to me. "The king falls in the opening." I whistled. "Dramatic." Petrov dismissed it as theatrics, Carstairs said tightly. This morning, however, he complained of being followed. And this afternoon, someone tampered with his tea. Wolfe's brows rose 1/8 of an inch. That's roughly equivalent to most men jumping out of their chairs. Tampered how? The hotel waiter insists he left the tray unattended for no more than a minute. Petrov drank from the cup and immediately felt ill. The tournament physician examined him. "No serious harm, yet." "Poison?" I asked. "A mild sedative, according to preliminary tests." Wolfe leaned back. "So. Someone wishes to inconvenience him. Or frighten him," Carstairs snapped. "Fear," Wolfe said softly, "is the most economical weapon." Carstairs clasped his hands together. "Mr. Wolfe, if anything happens to Petrov, if there is scandal, violence, the financial and diplomatic consequences could be catastrophic. I want you to prevent it." Wolfe closed his eyes. Silence settled like dust in sunlight. I counted to 10. When Wolfe closes his eyes, he's either thinking or calculating how much he dislikes you. Finally he spoke. "I do not attend tournaments. I do not observe crowds. I do not endure hotel lobbies. I do not interrupt my schedule. Carstairs' jaw tightened. Name your fee. Wolfe opened one eye. Mr. Goodwin will visit the hotel. He will observe. You will pay $10,000, plus expenses. Carstairs didn't blink this time. Done. After he left, I shut the door and leaned against it. 10,000. I said. For not leaving the house. Wolfe folded his hands across his vast stomach. I am leaving nothing. You are. Ah. The classic division of labor. Precisely. I studied him. You really hate chess. I hate the pretense that it excludes human folly. It is merely murder conducted politely. That line stuck. The Hotel Churchill ballroom looked like a cathedral designed by accountants. Long velvet-draped tables, green-shaded lamps, hushed spectators lined along the walls like jury members. The players sat rigidly, eyes locked on their boards as if salvation lay 64 squares away. Viktor Petrov was easy to spot, pale, hawk-nosed, and visibly irritated by being alive. I flashed my card. Archie Goodwin. Private inquiry. Petrov regarded me as though I were a pawn attempting promotion. This is ridiculous, he muttered in thick Russian accent. Someone put sleeping powder in tea. It is prank. Maybe, I said. But somebody paid 10 grand to make sure you don't take a permanent nap. Across the room, I noticed a young man watching us, Daniel Kessler. 22, American prodigy, clean-cut, eyes too sharp for comfort. When Petrov glanced his way, something flickered between them. Not admiration. I also made the acquaintance of Ingrid Reinhardt, wife of Austrian Grandmaster Karl Reinhardt. She had cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass and a voice like silk over steel. You Americans love drama, she said coolly. In Europe, threats are more efficient. Is that a complaint? I asked. She smiled faintly. Merely an observation. Later, in the lobby, I cornered the tournament organizer, Morris Hale, compact, perspiring, carrying 3 clipboards like shields. Any disgruntled sponsors? I asked. Of course not. Disgruntled players? He hesitated a second too long. Chess is competitive. Competitive enough to spike tea. That is absurd. Sure it was. I left the hotel around 9. The city air had turned colder, shadows stretching long across wet pavement. A taxi splashed past, neon reflecting in the puddles like fractured constellations. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was at his desk with a glass of beer. Well, he asked. I relayed everything, the sedative, Petrov's dismissiveness, Kessler's stare, Mrs. Reinhardt's cool amusement, Hale's nervous perspiration. Wolfe listened without interruption. Who benefits if Petrov withdraws? He asked. Kessler's the rising star. Reinhardt's second seed. And the sponsors? Money, Wolfe murmured. Always the vulgar denominator. He reached for the photograph I had taken of Petrov's board before leaving. Final position before adjournment? Yeah. Something about a Sicilian defense. Wolfe studied it, eyes narrowing. Minutes passed. Then he said quietly, interesting. Care to share with the class? This position, he said, tapping the photo, is impossible. I blinked. Impossible how? There are too many moves accounted for. Meaning? Meaning, Mr. Goodwin, that the game displayed on that board did not occur naturally. A cold thread ran down my spine. So somebody rearranged the pieces? Yes. Why? Wolfe leaned back, eyes glittering now. Because, Archie, this was not merely an attempt at poisoning. He lifted his beer, took a measured sip. It was a move. And somewhere in New York that night, someone was preparing the next one. Chapter 2, Check Without Warning. If Chapter 1 ended with Wolfe announcing that the chessboard had lied, Chapter 2 began with someone trying to make sure the pieces didn't get a chance to explain themselves. I was halfway through my morning coffee at the corner diner, the kind with cracked leather booths and waitresses who call you "hon" whether they mean it or not, when the payphone rang. Only one person calls a diner and expects to find me. Archie, Wolfe's voice rumbled through the receiver, deep and controlled, return immediately. No good morning. It is not good. That was enough. I paid, tipped generously, because homicide investigations burn calories, and grabbed a cab downtown. The sky over Manhattan was the color of wet slate, and the taxi radio muttered about traffic and the Dodgers. When I reached the brownstone, Wolfe was not in his office chair. That was unsettling. He was standing. Standing. His massive frame loomed near his desk, yellow silk vest immaculate, eyes sharp as cut glass. The scent of orchids drifted faintly from upstairs. He had completed his morning ritual. Fritz had left a silver tray of untouched coffee on the sideboard. That meant business. Well, I said, hanging up my coat. Mr. Carstairs telephoned at 8:42, Wolfe said. Viktor Petrov has collapsed. I stopped smiling. Dead? Unconscious. Possibly dying. And this time? Not tea. The Hotel Churchill ballroom had lost its cathedral hush. Now it resembled a nervous ward. Spectators whispered in clusters. Photographers lurked like vultures waiting for a better angle. Police were already present, one lieutenant I recognized from a poker raid in Queens. Viktor Petrov lay on a velvet chaise in a private anteroom, a physician bending over him. His skin was gray, lips pale. A half-finished glass of mineral water sat on a small table beside him. Same waiter? I asked Morris Hale, who looked as if someone had removed the bones from his body. No, Hale whispered. Different server. Different tray. Convenient. The doctor straightened. He's breathing. Pulse irregular. Could be cardiac. Could be toxin. Could be nerves. I suggested. The doctor shot me a look. This is not theatrical fainting. I glanced toward the ballroom. The games had halted mid-move. Pieces frozen. Kings suspended in quiet anxiety. Daniel Kessler stood apart, arms folded, face pale but eyes calculating. When he saw me, he approached. Is he going to die? He asked flatly. You sound disappointed. His jaw tightened. If Petrov withdraws, the standings change. That's arithmetic, not malice. Arithmetic can be deadly, I said. Across the room, Ingrid Reinhardt was speaking urgently to her husband, Karl. He was red-faced, agitated, gesturing toward the board. I drifted closer. This is sabotage. Karl barked in accented English. First Petrov, then disruption of play. Ingrid's voice was silk and ice. Control yourself. I made a mental note, marriages built on discipline sometimes crack under pressure. Before leaving, I snapped photographs of Petrov's board, and, because I am naturally suspicious, of two others. Something about the arrangement tugged at me. Not wrong. Just, deliberate. Outside, New York traffic honked its indifference. I found a taxi and headed back uptown, the city sliding past in gray streaks. Wolfe was seated again when I entered, order restored. A glass of beer stood precisely 3 inches from his right hand. Well, he asked. I gave him the scene, Petrov's collapse, the mineral water, Kessler's cool arithmetic, Reinhardt's temper, Hale's perspiration. Wolfe listened without blinking. Did you observe the boards? Photographed 3 of them. Excellent. Place them on the desk. He studied the images in silence. 5 minutes. 10. When Nero Wolfe thinks, time becomes theoretical. Finally he tapped the photograph of Petrov's board. Again, he murmured. Again what? The position is artificial. You said that yesterday. Yes. Yesterday it was rearranged. Today it has been adjusted. Adjusted how? There is a knight misplaced by 1 square. That's it. That is everything. I sank into the red leather chair. You're telling me somebody risked prison to move a wooden horse 1 inch? Yes. And poison a Grandmaster? Perhaps. I leaned forward. You think the collapse is staged? I think, Wolfe said carefully, that someone wishes us to focus on the body rather than the board. Meaning? Meaning the true message lies not in Petrov's pulse, but in those 64 squares. I rubbed my forehead. You really do hate chess. I despise incompetence masquerading as intellect. The phone rang. Wolfe gestured. I picked up. Goodwin. The voice on the line was tight, breathless. This is Daniel Kessler. Congratulations. Petrov's room has been searched. By whom? Police. They found another note. I felt the room tilt slightly. What did it say? A pause. The second move is forced. The line went dead. I related to Wolfe. He closed his eyes. Second move, he repeated softly. First was the tea, I said. Second is the water. Possibly. Or the night. Wolfe opened his eyes. Archie, how many players are in the tournament? 8. And how many boards? 4 per round. Good. Now consider, if someone wished to communicate privately through public play, what would he require? An audience that understands the code. Precisely. I stared at the photographs again. You think this isn't about killing Petrov? I think, Wolfe said, voice dropping, that Petrov may be incidental. That word landed hard. Incidental. A king on a chessboard is powerful only because the rules declare him so. In life, Mr. Goodwin, power is assigned differently. I didn't like that. The doorbell rang. I went to answer it. Morris Hale stood there, hat crushed in his hands, eyes wide. He's gone, he said. Petrov? No. Who? Daniel Kessler. That did it. Gone how? He left the hotel 20 minutes ago. Said he needed air. He hasn't returned. His coat is missing. His room key is gone. And there was a chessboard set up in his suite. I felt my pulse tick up. In what position? Hale swallowed. The same as Petrov's. But missing a bishop. Behind me, from the office, Wolfe's voice floated out, calm, resonant, inevitable. Bring him in, Archie. I ushered Hale inside. Wolfe did not rise. Mr. Hale, he said smoothly, describe the board precisely. Hale stammered through it. Wolfe listened. Then he nodded once. The second move, he murmured. I couldn't stand it. Okay, boss. We've got one Grandmaster unconscious, another missing, poison in the refreshments, cryptic notes, and somebody playing interior decorator with chess pieces. You want to tell me we're not dealing with attempted murder? Wolfe lifted his beer, examined it as though the answer might be reflected in the foam. Archie, he said quietly, attempted murder is crude. This is orchestration. Of what? He met my eyes. Of fear. The brownstone felt suddenly smaller. The orchids upstairs carried their sweet, heavy scent down the stairwell, thick and cloying. Outside, a taxi backfired like a gunshot. Fear of what? I asked. Wolfe set the glass down with precise care. That, he said, is what we must discover before the third move is made. And somewhere in Manhattan, perhaps in a hotel corridor, perhaps in the shadow of a cab stand, perhaps seated calmly before another waiting board, someone was deciding exactly what that third move would cost. Chapter 3, The Gambit. By Wednesday morning, the chess tournament had stopped pretending it was about chess. Viktor Petrov remained unconscious but stable. Daniel Kessler remained missing. The newspapers had begun using words like mystery and international incident, which meant the police were officially irritated and unofficially lost. Inside the brownstone, however, order reigned. Nero Wolfe had completed his morning with the orchids, no poison there unless someone had found a way to weaponize dendrobiums, and now sat in his chair with a folder of photographs spread across his desk like evidence in a trial. I stood by the window watching West 35th Street wake up, delivery trucks coughing exhaust, a taxi honking at a pedestrian who valued his bones. It was a gray morning again. The kind that makes you suspect even sunlight of ulterior motives. Well, I said. Wolfe ignored me. Archie, he murmured after a moment, you are hovering. I'm narrating. You are obstructing oxygen. I took my seat. You've been staring at those boards for an hour. If they confess, wake me. He steepled his fingers. The positions from Petrov's table and Kessler's room are not random, he said. Nor are they attempts at aesthetic mimicry. You've mentioned. They form a progression. I sighed. A progression toward what? That, he said, is the essential question. He tapped the first photograph, Petrov's initial poison game position. Note the configuration of the white pieces. I see them. You see shapes. I see intention. Now observe the second position from Petrov's collapse. He slid it beside the first. One knight displaced. Your famous inch. Yes. And now Kessler's board. The third photograph showed the same structure, except the bishop was missing entirely. So we're losing material, I said. That's bad in chess. It is catastrophic if one is careless. I leaned forward. You think someone's announcing removals? Possibly. Removals of what? Players? Wolfe's eyes flicked up to mine. Or obstacles. That hung there. The phone rang. I answered. Goodwin. A woman's voice, controlled but tight. This is Ingrid Reinhardt. Good morning. I wish to speak with Mr. Wolfe. One moment. I covered the receiver. Reinhardt's better half. Wolfe extended his hand. I passed the phone. Yes, madam. Silence while she spoke. I see, Wolfe said at last. And you did not inform the police? A pause. Very well. Mr. Goodwin will call. He hung up. Well? I asked. Karl Reinhardt received a note last night. Another poetic masterpiece. More direct. What did it say? Wolfe regarded me evenly. A sacrifice clarifies the board. I let out a low whistle. These guys are really committed to theme. Reinhardt did not report it to the authorities. Why? Because, Wolfe said, he assumed it was part of a psychological ploy by a rival. Meaning? Meaning that among these intellectual athletes, intimidation is not unprecedented. I stood. So which of them is willing to push it into attempted homicide? That, Wolfe said, is what you will discover. The Hotel Churchill lobby smelled of polish and nervousness. A pair of reporters lingered near the elevators. I avoided them and took the stairs. Karl Reinhardt answered his suite door himself. He looked worse than he had the day before, eyes bloodshot, tie askew. His wife stood near the window, arms folded, composed as marble. You did not inform the police, I said without preamble. Reinhardt flushed. It was nonsense. I held out my hand. Show me. He handed over the note. Same cream paper. Same neat capitals. A sacrifice clarifies the board. Anyone else see this? I asked. No. Where was it delivered? Under the door. Time. After midnight. Ingrid spoke for the first time. Karl believes Daniel Kessler sent it. Why? I asked. He accused Karl of stalling tactics during their match. Reinhardt snapped, he insulted my integrity. Did you threaten him? I asked mildly. I do not threaten. I defeat. Except he's missing. Silence. I watched Ingrid. No flicker. No surprise. Mrs. Reinhardt, I said, do you think Kessler capable of staging his own disappearance? Her eyes sharpened. For advantage, she asked. For drama. In America, she said coolly, drama is currency. That was interesting. Kessler's room had been searched but not sealed. The police assumed voluntary absence. The chessboard remained on a small writing desk. Same core position. Missing bishop. But something else caught my eye. A scrap of paper in the wastebasket. I fished it out. A list of numbers. 12, 7, 19, 3, 5. Not random. Not in that context. I folded it into my pocket. Downstairs, I ran into Morris Hale. He looked like a man calculating insurance policies. Any word, he asked. Not yet. He swallowed. The sponsors are restless. I imagine. He hesitated. If Kessler withdraws, the standings. Arithmetic, I finished. He gave a thin smile. On my way out, I paused at Petrov's table. The board had been reset for exhibition. But the captured pieces lay in a small velvet pouch beside it. I counted. All present. Except one bishop. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was finishing lunch, roast duck, courtesy of Fritz's culinary devotion. He does not discuss homicide while eating. I waited. Finally, beer appeared. I laid out Reinhardt's note and the scrap of numbers. Wolfe examined the paper. 12, 7, 19, 3, 5, he read. Mean anything? Possibly. To me it means I skipped breakfast. Wolfe ignored that. Archie, how many letters in the alphabet? 26. And if one assigns numerical order? Are we spelling something? He nodded once. I did the math. 12 equals L. 7 equals G. 19 equals S. 3 equals C. 5 equals E. LGSCE, I said. That's not helpful. Wolfe's eyes glinted. You are assuming the sequence begins at 1. I blinked. Offset? Yes. My head hurt. Or, Wolfe continued, it may correspond to moves. I slumped back. Chess again. He leaned forward slightly. The poison administered to Petrov was mild. Incapacitating, not lethal. Agreed. The water may have contained nothing. You think he fainted? I think he was meant to. A chill crept in. And Kessler? Maybe enacting the second stage. You're suggesting this is planned? Cooperative? Perhaps. I stood. Or someone's picking them off. Yes. That narrows it down beautifully. Wolfe's gaze hardened. Archie, note the language of the messages, opening, second move, sacrifice. Yeah. These are structural. Meaning? They describe phases. I stared at him. You think someone's building towards something bigger? Yes. Like what? He leaned back, fingers steepled. Checkmate. The word settled heavily. The phone rang again. I answered. Goodwin. A male voice, trembling. This is the tournament physician. Yes. I thought you should know. Know what? A swallow on the other end. Petrov has regained consciousness. Good. He says he remembers drinking the water. And? He says someone was standing behind him. Who? Silence. He doesn't know. But he says. Yes. He says the board was already wrong before he collapsed. I looked at Wolfe. He was watching me closely. What else? I asked. The doctor hesitated. He says he moved the night back. The line clicked dead. I lowered the receiver slowly. Well? Wolfe demanded. Petrov says the board was wrong before he fainted. Wolfe closed his eyes. And he moved the night back. Yes. Wolfe inhaled deeply, the faint perfume of orchids mixing with cigar smoke. Good. Good. Yes. Why? He opened his eyes. Because, Archie, that means the game we are observing is not theirs. Whose is it? Wolfe's voice dropped to a near whisper. The organizers. The room felt colder. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere downtown. And in the quiet of the brownstone, surrounded by orchids and polished wood and Wolfe's immovable bulk, I had the distinct feeling that we were no longer watching a tournament. We were inside it. Chapter 4, The Middle Game Trap. By Thursday morning the chess tournament had acquired something it hadn't advertised in its glossy program, a corpse. Daniel Kessler was found at 6:20 a.m. in Riverside Park, sprawled near a wrought iron bench overlooking the Hudson. A patrolman spotted him during his rounds. There was no dramatic splash of blood, no theatrical violence, just a young man lying on damp grass beneath a sky the color of tin. The papers called it tragedy before breakfast. The police called it homicide by 9. I called Wolfe at 7:15. Yes, Archie. Kessler's been located. A pause. Alive? No. Silence, not shock, not grief. Calculation. Return, he said. Immediately. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had already completed his orchid ritual. That meant he'd known something was coming. He was in his chair, immense and immovable, vest immaculate, a glass of beer untouched on the table beside him. I gave him the essentials. No visible wounds, I said. Medical examiner suspects poisoning. Possibly ingested within the last 8 hours. No signs of struggle. Personal effects. Wallet intact. Cash untouched. Room key in pocket. Wolfe nodded once. Where was he last seen? Hotel lobby, around 10:30 p.m. said he needed air. And no one accompanied him? Not that admits to it. Wolfe closed his eyes. You will return to the hotel, he said. You will observe reactions. I love funerals. Archie. Yes, sir. Pay particular attention to Mr. Hale. The organizer. Yes. Why? Wolfe opened his eyes and fixed me with a look that usually precedes enlightenment or homicide. Because, he said, the board is thinning. The Hotel Churchill felt different now. The hush wasn't reverent, it was frightened. Reporters crowded the entrance. Uniformed officers stood near the elevators. Someone had drawn the curtains in the ballroom, muting the daylight as if brightness might offend the dead. Morris Hale looked worse than ever, gray complexion, damp collar, eyes darting like trapped insects. This is catastrophic, he muttered when I cornered him near the registration desk. For Kessler, certainly. For all of us. Sponsors are threatening withdrawal. Carstairs is furious. Interesting order of priorities. He wiped his forehead. Do the police suspect foul play? He asked. They suspect oxygen. He flinched. Where were you last night between 10 and midnight? I asked. In my office. Reviewing pairings. Anyone see you? My assistant. Briefly. Name. Evelyn Parker. I made a note. Ingrid Reinhardt stood near the ballroom entrance, speaking quietly to her husband. Carl looked shaken, genuinely shaken this time. His earlier bluster had evaporated. I approached. You heard, I said. Carl nodded stiffly. Yes. Regretful. Of course. Last night. In our suite. Ingrid. She met my gaze without blinking. Together. Entire evening. Yes. No hesitation. No glance at Carl. That was almost too neat. Viktor Petrov, pale but upright, sat alone at a small table. His eyes followed me as I approached. "You recover quickly," I said. He shrugged faintly. "I was not dying." "You seem certain." He leaned closer. "They wanted drama. Not death." "Who?" His gaze flicked toward the ballroom, then back. "Someone who is not a player." That echoed uncomfortably. "You moved the knight," I said. He smiled thinly. "Yes." "Why?" "Because it was wrong." "And you corrected it?" "Yes." "Before collapsing?" "Yes." "Why collapse?" He leaned back. "I did not collapse. I was pushed. That got my attention." "Physically?" "No. Strategically." I left him with that and headed upstairs. Kessler's suite was sealed now, but I managed a quiet word with the desk clerk. "Did anyone visit him after 10? I asked. She hesitated. "There was a phone call." "From whom?" "Internal line." "Extension?" She checked the log. "Tournament office." That meant Hale. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was midway through lunch, sweetbreads in cream sauce. I waited until Fritz removed the plates and the sacred beer arrived. "Well?" Wolfe said. I laid it out: Hale's alibi, the internal call, Petrov's comment about being pushed, Ingrid's seamless confirmation, Karl's shaken nerves. Wolfe listened, fingertips together. "Archie," he said at last, "in chess, the middle game is where deception thrives." Glad to know. The opening establishes structure. The endgame resolves it. But the middle, he gestured vaguely, is chaos disguised as strategy. You think we're there? Yes. I leaned forward. Hale called Kessler before he left the hotel. Wolfe nodded slowly. Did Kessler answer? According to the clerk, yes. And shortly thereafter he departed. Correct. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Archie, what is the financial structure of this tournament? Prize money, sponsorship, broadcasting rights. And insurance? I blinked. Insurance? Yes. Policies against disruption. Withdrawal. Illness. I stared at him. You think someone benefits if players fall out? Possibly. Fall out permanently? Wolfe's gaze hardened. That would depend on the policy. The phone rang. I answered. Goodwin. A woman's voice, tight, frightened. This is Evelyn Parker. Mr. Hale's assistant. Yes. I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe. Why? I found something. My pulse ticked upward. Found what? In Mr. Hale's office. A board. Wolfe gestured impatiently for the phone. Yes, Miss Parker. She spoke quickly. Yes, Wolfe said. Do not touch it further. Mr. Goodwin will come. He hung up. Well? I demanded. There is a chessboard in Hale's private office, Wolfe said evenly. It mirrors the progression. Meaning? The knight corrected. The bishop removed. And? There is now a rook missing. A chill slid down my spine. Rook, I repeated. Yes. Who's the rook? Wolfe leaned back, enormous and still. That, he said quietly, depends on perspective. Evelyn Parker met me in a narrow corridor behind the ballroom. She was young, nervous, clutching a ledger like armor. In his office, she whispered. Inside, on a small side table, stood a chessboard. Same base position. Knight corrected. Bishop gone. And now, one rook missing. Anyone else seen this? I asked. She shook her head. I came early to organize correspondence. It was already there. Does Hale play? Not well. Does he understand symbolism? She hesitated. He understands money. That was honest. I photographed the board carefully. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye on Hale's desk, an insurance folder. I didn't open it. Not yet. Outside, a taxi splashed through a puddle. The sky hung low, heavy with threat. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe studied the new photograph in silence. "Well?" I asked. He spoke slowly. "The pattern is deliberate." "Yes." "And incorrect." "Incorrect how?" "The sacrifice of a bishop followed by a rook is illogical given the initial structure." So, Wolfe said softly, "the killer is not a master." I stared. "He's pretending." "Yes." "Why?" "To frame someone who is." The room felt very quiet. "You mean one of the Grandmasters?" "Perhaps." "And Hale?" Wolfe lifted his beer and took a measured sip. "Hale," he said, "is either orchestrating or being positioned." "Which?" He set the glass down carefully. "That," he said, "is the trap." Outside, Manhattan hummed in indifferent motion, taxis, diners, shadows lengthening as afternoon crept toward evening. Inside the brownstone, among orchids and polished wood, the board had lost another piece. And I had the uneasy suspicion that before this was over, someone intended to remove the king. Chapter 5, Checkmate Approaches. By Friday afternoon, the brownstone had the atmosphere of a courtroom waiting for a verdict, heavy, expectant, and faintly accusatory. Nero Wolfe does not enjoy crowds in his home. He tolerates them the way a monarch tolerates revolutions, with dignity and limited patience. Yet he had instructed me that morning to summon them all. "All?" I had asked. "All," he repeated. "Mr. Carstairs. Mr. Hale. Mr. and Mrs. Reinhardt. Mr. Petrov. And Miss Parker." That's practically the seating chart from the ballroom. Precisely. And so, by 5 o'clock, they were assembled in Wolfe's office, a study in contrasts. Outside, West 35th Street carried on with taxis splashing through damp pavement and a hot dog vendor arguing about mustard. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of orchids drifting down from upstairs, mingling with cigar smoke and tension. Wolfe sat enthroned in his massive chair, yellow vest immaculate, expression serene. A glass of beer rested at his right hand, positioned with geometric precision. I stood by my desk, notebook ready, prepared to mediate, provoke, or duck as necessary. Lionel Carstairs was rigid and indignant. Morris Hale looked one mild breeze away from collapse. Karl Reinhardt simmered. Ingrid Reinhardt observed everything. Victor Petrov, pale but upright, radiated contained fury. Evelyn Parker clutched her handbag like a flotation device. Wolfe let the silence ripen. Then he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are present because a man is dead, another was poisoned, and a third was nearly so. This is not coincidence." Hale swallowed audibly. Wolfe continued. 3 chess positions were displayed in sequence. A knight displaced. A bishop removed. A rook removed. Carstairs stiffened. "You believe these theatrics relevant to Kessler's death?" "I do not believe in theatrics," Wolfe said evenly. "Only intention." I stepped in. For those keeping score, the boards appeared in this order, first at Petrov's table, then after his collapse, then in Kessler's room, and finally in Mr. Hale's office. Hale jerked upright. "That board was planted." Wolfe lifted a finger. "You will speak when I permit." Hale sank back. Wolfe's eyes moved from face to face. "The poison administered to Mr. Petrov was mild. Non-lethal. Calculated to alarm but not kill." Petrov nodded curtly. "The subsequent collapse," Wolfe continued, "was facilitated by confusion and suggestion." Petrov's gaze sharpened. "You imply I cooperated?" "I imply," Wolfe said calmly, "that you corrected the knight." Petrov's jaw tightened. "Yes," he admitted. "It was wrong." "Indeed," Wolfe murmured. Wrong by design. I watched Hale. A bead of sweat traced his temple. Wolfe leaned slightly forward, which for him is equivalent to most men lunging. Mr. Hale, your office contained the fourth board. A rook missing. I told you, I didn't put it there. Wolfe regarded him impassively. Miss Parker discovered it early that morning. Evelyn nodded nervously. Wolfe continued, Mr. Hale also telephoned Mr. Kessler shortly before his disappearance. Hale's mouth opened, then closed. Yes, he said finally. To discuss scheduling. At 10:30 p.m. Yes. Curious hour for administrative details. Carstairs snapped, this is outrageous. Wolfe ignored him. Now, he said softly, let us consider motive. I shifted my weight. Here it came. In competitive chess, Wolfe said, removing a knight, bishop, and rook in sequence would constitute extraordinary self-destruction, unless one intended to reshape the board. Karl Reinhardt exploded. This is absurd. You accuse one of us. I accuse no one, Wolfe replied smoothly. I observe. Ingrid's voice cut in like a scalpel. And what do you observe? Wolfe's eyes gleamed. I observe that the pattern of removal corresponds not to strength, but to roles. Silence. Knight, he said, often represents agility. Bishop, strategy. Rook, structure. Carstairs shifted uncomfortably. And the king? Petrov asked quietly. Wolfe's gaze flicked to him. Untouched. For now. I cleared my throat. There's also the matter of insurance. All eyes turned. Carstairs stiffened. Insurance? Yes, I said pleasantly. Policies covering player withdrawal, illness, disruption. Generous policies. Hale's complexion went from gray to chalk. Wolfe spoke without raising his voice. Financial documents indicate that substantial payouts would be triggered if the tournament were unable to proceed under its advertised roster. Carstairs turned slowly toward Hale. You told me the coverage was minimal. Hale stammered, it was, standard. Standard for what? Carstairs barked. For volatility. Hale cried. Grandmasters are temperamental. Wolfe lifted his hand slightly. The room quieted. Mr. Hale, he said, you are either criminally inventive or criminally foolish. Hale's eyes darted. I didn't kill anyone. Perhaps not, Wolfe said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Petrov spoke again, voice low. Someone stood behind me when I drank the water. Yes, Wolfe agreed. But that someone did not poison you. Petrov blinked. What? Carstairs demanded. The water, Wolfe said calmly, contained no toxin. I stared at him. You didn't mention that. I had not yet confirmed it. He turned back to the room. The collapse was induced by fear and suggestion. The prior sedative created expectation. Expectation created response. Petrov's face darkened. You mean I fainted? I mean, Wolfe said evenly, you were manipulated. Reinhardt gave a short, bitter laugh. So the first attack was theater. Yes. And the second? Ingrid asked quietly. Kessler, Wolfe said, did not die theatrically. The silence that followed was heavy. His poisoning was precise, Wolfe continued. Measured. Administered after he left the hotel. Hale whispered, I didn't follow him. No, Wolfe said. You did not. All eyes turned. My pulse ticked upward. You're ruling him out? I asked carefully. Wolfe did not answer me directly. Instead, he looked at Carstairs. Mr. Carstairs, your investment in this tournament is substantial. Yes. And your reputation? Of course. And if scandal erupted? It would damage me. Unless, Wolfe said softly, you were compensated. Carstairs flushed crimson. Are you suggesting? I suggest nothing. I assemble. Karl Reinhardt rose halfway from his chair. This is madness. My wife and I have nothing to gain from this chaos. Ingrid's gaze flicked briefly toward Hale. Nothing to gain. I noticed. Wolfe leaned back, reclaiming his full immovable presence. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice resonant, we are approaching checkmate. Hale let out a strangled sound. But not yet, Wolfe added. I exhaled slowly. Wolfe continued. The sequence of boards was meant to imply sophistication, to suggest the hand of a master. Petrov's eyes narrowed. But the sacrifices were strategically unsound, Wolfe said. A true grandmaster would not construct such a progression. Reinhardt stiffened. You imply incompetence. I imply imitation. The word hovered. Imitation, Ingrid repeated softly. Yes. I stepped forward. So somebody wanted it to look like a player was behind it. Wolfe inclined his head. And someone, he continued, benefits if suspicion falls upon rivalry rather than administration. Hale's breathing grew audible. But, Wolfe said, raising a finger, the final error has not yet been made. The room seemed to lean toward him. What error? Carstairs demanded. Wolfe's eyes swept the group. The one that will expose the architect. A taxi horn blared outside, shrill and insistent. The fading daylight filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across Persian rugs and polished wood. The scent of orchids drifted faintly down the staircase. Wolfe lifted his beer, studying the foam as though it contained prophecy. Until then, he said quietly, we wait. And as I looked around the room, at Carstairs' fury, Hale's fear, Reinhardt's pride, Ingrid's cool calculation, Petrov's simmering anger, I realized something unsettling. The king was still on the board. But someone, somewhere in that room, was preparing to tip it over. Chapter 6, Checkmate. Saturday evening brought rain, the steady, deliberate kind that turns Manhattan into a blurred watercolor of headlights and secrets. Taxis hissed along wet pavement. The brownstone windows reflected the city in fractured gold streaks. Inside, Nero Wolfe was in his chair. That detail matters. When Wolfe intends to end a matter, he does not pace. He does not dramatize. He occupies his chair as if it were a throne and the rest of us merely visiting provinces. The orchids upstairs had been attended to. Fritz had delivered dinner, duckling with cherry reduction, and been dismissed. A glass of beer stood at Wolfe's right hand. Perfectly aligned. I had made the calls. They arrived in varying degrees of damp irritation. Lionel Carstairs first, bristling in an overcoat. Karl and Ingrid Reinhardt together, controlled and composed. Victor Petrov, pale but upright, eyes like chips of granite. Evelyn Parker, nervous but resolute. And finally, Morris Hale. He entered last, rain clinging to his shoulders, eyes shifting in quick, nervous movements. When all were seated, Wolfe allowed the silence to expand until it became unbearable. Then he spoke. We conclude. No preamble. No theatrics. Carstairs snapped, I certainly hope so. You will restrain yourself, Wolfe said mildly, or depart. Carstairs restrained. Wolfe folded his hands. Daniel Kessler was murdered. Victor Petrov was deliberately frightened. The tournament was destabilized by calculated interference. He turned his gaze toward Hale. The chessboards were not symbolic art. They were staging. Hale swallowed. Wolfe continued. The progression, knight displaced, bishop removed, rook removed, was designed to imply escalating sacrifice. To suggest a masterful hand. Reinhardt leaned forward. You said the sequence was flawed. Yes. Why? Because, Wolfe said evenly, no grandmaster would construct such an inefficient exchange pattern. It was theatrical, not strategic. Petrov's lips curved faintly. Wolfe continued. The poison administered to Petrov was mild. Designed not to kill, but to establish plausibility. His subsequent collapse resulted from suggestion and manipulation. Petrov bristled. I do not faint from suggestion. No, Wolfe agreed calmly. You fainted because someone told you the water was contaminated. Petrov froze. I saw it then, the flicker. Wolfe went on. The physician's report confirms no toxin was present in the mineral water. Carstairs turned sharply toward Petrov. You said. I believed, Petrov began. You believed what you were meant to believe, Wolfe said. Hale shifted in his chair. Wolfe's voice remained smooth. Mr. Hale telephoned Mr. Kessler shortly before his disappearance. That fact aroused suspicion. Hale nodded rapidly. But I didn't. Yes, Wolfe said. You did. The room tightened. You called him, Wolfe continued, to inform him that his insurance clause had been activated. Hale's mouth opened. Carstairs stared. Insurance clause. Wolfe inclined his head. Mr. Kessler had recently taken out a private supplemental policy against injury or forced withdrawal. A policy facilitated by tournament administration. All eyes turned to Hale. I was helping him, Hale said weakly. It was optional. Wolfe's voice sharpened slightly. Optional, but lucrative. For both of you. Carstairs exploded. You told me the players handled their own policies. Hale's composure began to fracture. Wolfe pressed on. The tournament carried disruption insurance as well. Generous coverage in the event that marquee players were incapacitated. Carstairs went pale. You increased the coverage last month, Wolfe said softly. Quietly. Carstairs sputtered. Standard risk management. Yes, Wolfe agreed. For someone anticipating volatility. The rain intensified against the windows. I watched Hale carefully. Wolfe leaned forward. The boards were placed to imply rivalry among grandmasters. To divert suspicion toward competitive jealousy. Reinhardt stiffened. Ingrid's eyes narrowed. But the sequence revealed its architect, Wolfe continued. Hale whispered, how? Wolfe's eyes fixed on him. Because the final removal, the rook, corresponded not to a player, but to a role. Silence. In chess, Wolfe said, the rook governs structure. Organization. Infrastructure. Hale's breathing grew audible. You removed the rook from your own board, Wolfe said calmly. In your office. Hale shook his head frantically. Someone planted it. No, Wolfe said. You placed it there prematurely. The room seemed to hold its breath. You intended the rook's removal to represent the collapse of tournament structure, a trigger for insurance payout. Carstairs rose halfway from his chair. You were planning to declare the event unsustainable. Hale's voice cracked. It was failing. Sponsors were restless. Kessler's contract. Yes, Wolfe said softly. Kessler. All eyes shifted. You did not intend to kill him, Wolfe continued. At first. Hale's composure shattered. I only meant to frighten them, he cried. Petrov's tea, harmless. The boards, symbolic. It would force renegotiations. Petrov surged forward. You used me as prop. Yes. Hale shouted. You're all props. Pawns in a spectacle. The word hung there. Wolfe's voice remained controlled. But Kessler became a liability. Hale's eyes darted wildly. He threatened exposure, Wolfe said. He realized the policies were inflated. That payouts would benefit administration disproportionately. Evelyn Parker gasped softly. You confronted him Thursday night, Wolfe continued. In his suite. You persuaded him to leave the hotel, to avoid police scrutiny. Hale's shoulders sagged. And in Riverside Park, Wolfe finished, you administered a far less theatrical dose. Silence. The rain softened. Hale slumped back, hands trembling. I didn't mean, he began weakly. You meant, Wolfe said evenly, to save your failing enterprise and secure profit through manufactured crisis. Carstairs stared at Hale with something like disbelief curdling into fury. You destroyed it, he whispered. Police had been alerted, courtesy of my earlier call. The doorbell rang on cue. 2 detectives entered. Hale did not resist. As they led him away, he muttered, it was just strategy. Wolfe responded without rising. No, Mr. Hale. It was greed. The door closed. Silence returned to the brownstone, broken only by the faint ticking of the mantel clock. Carstairs stood stiffly. My reputation will survive, Wolfe said. If you demonstrate transparency. Reinhardt exhaled sharply. Ingrid's expression remained unreadable. Petrov met Wolfe's gaze. You saw it from the board, he said quietly. Yes. Petrov inclined his head once, the closest thing to gratitude I expected. One by one, they departed. The rain slowed to a whisper. I shut the door behind the last of them and leaned against it. Well, I said, that was tidy. Wolfe lifted his beer. Tidy is a relative term. You hate chess, I reminded him. I hate incompetence, he corrected. I crossed to the desk. You never left the house. I rarely need to. I studied him. The knight, bishop, rook, rolls, not players. Yes. And the king? Wolfe's eyes gleamed faintly. The king, he said, was never in danger. Who was the king? He took a measured sip of beer. The money, Archie. It always is. Outside, a taxi splashed through the last of the rain. The city resumed its rhythm, indifferent, relentless. Upstairs, the orchids rested in careful order. In the quiet warmth of the brownstone, Nero Wolfe settled deeper into his chair, immense and immovable. Archie, he said mildly. Yes. Close the curtains. Drafts are intolerable. I smiled. Checkmate.
If you like our story, please like, share, and subscribe.